our formal opening. Okay, I think I'm going to get started. I see our room is still filling up, but we want to get rolling because we've got an incredibly valuable, compelling program to share with you today. I'm Paul Revel of the Education Redesign Lab, and on behalf of our team at Ed Redesign, I'd like to welcome you to our 11th semi-annual convening. I want to welcome back all our old friends, especially our By All Means cabinets and our local children's cabinet members, our LCCN partners, the Forum for Youth Investment and the Children's Funding Project. I also want to welcome aboard our new friends and members of the extended Harvard Graduate School of Education family. Thank you all for being here, and especially thank you for your work on the front lines of equity in education. Our work has moved to the center because of the pandemic's effect on widening inequities and increasing opportunity gaps, and because of the increased demands for racial justice. It's become clearer and clearer to the general public and our political leaders that the work of equity is civic work, not just school work. Together we can, but schools, without a round-the-clock partnership with families and communities, cannot do it alone. Our work has always been about fairness, especially about delivering supports and opportunities to those not fortunate enough to inherit these privileges, which should be rights. We want every child, and all means all, to come to school healthy, secure, eager, and ready to learn. Sadly, that's not a given, but rather a tall order in our society. Our work is to figure out how to make equity happen. We're pleased to do this work with you side by side to learn from and be inspired what all of you are doing. We're eager to use our spotlight to shine on you and draw the world's attention to what you are accomplishing in local communities across this country. Our time together in these next couple of days is devoted to listening, thinking, learning, envisioning, and collaborating on taking advantage of this moment to build a better future for all students, especially those least advantaged. I want to begin by thanking all of our distinguished presenters, my amazing ERL team headed by Bridget Rodriguez and guided by Raina Hall. I also want to thank our supporters and funders, notably the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Linda Hammett Ori and Andy Ori Charitable Trust, the Oak Foundation, the Schwartz Family Foundation, the Shaw Family Foundation, the Buttonwieser family, and the Kumar family. I also want to introduce an old friend, a Harvard College, HKS, HGSE graduate, a distinguished professional on the national and international stages, and one of the leaders of our fast-paced Poughkeepsie team, Rob Watson. We are proud to announce that Rob is soon joining our staff leadership team as Ed Redesign's Director of Partnership and Community Impact. Rob, we're thrilled to have you with us and eager to have you join us in shaping the next chapter of our work. Finally, I just want to say that we truly do have right now a moment of opportunity. The window is open and a certain number of transformative changes may squeeze through if we have the leaders to push those changes through. You are those leaders. For the first time in memory, we have significant resources flowing in the direction of children's well-being and education. It is on us to make the most of these resources and to spend strategically and wisely. It is on us to seize the momentum and take this movement visibly forward. We are fortunate and honored today to have a keynote speaker who's an inspirational, pioneering national leader in the collaborative community-based equity work in which all of you are engaged. I want to thank Jeff Canada for honoring us with his presence today and for his leadership and ongoing partnership in this work. Here to introduce this famous HGSE graduate to you today is our own outstanding HGSE leader, someone who has deftly and wisely steered our school through these turbulent pandemic times, someone who is leading major curricular changes at the same time someone with a calm but firm hand on the tiller, the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Dr. Bridget Terry Long.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate that introduction. It's wonderful to join you here today as you start this amazing convening. Just really want to thank you again, as Paul said earlier, for your hard work and your dedication. You're so important to moving forward education and making sure that we serve all learners. As Paul said, my name is Bridget Terry Long, and I'm very proud to be the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And it is also my pleasure to be able to provide an introduction by a friend and HGSE alumnus, Jeffrey Canada, who's going to speak to you today on the timely and important topic of collaborative action for a more equitable future. So as you may know, Jeff is the founder and president of the Harlem Children's Zone and founder of the William Julius Wilson Institute. The Harlem Children's Zone is a birth through college network of programs that today serves more than 13,000 low-income students and families in a 97 block area of central Harlem and New York City. It has attracted amazing attention in the media and from leaders around the world. And in 2011, Time Magazine named Jeff one of the world's most influential people. And in 2014, he was named one of the 50 greatest leaders by Fortune Magazine. He was also featured in the documentary about the dire state of American education, Waiting for Superman, a sneak preview of which was shown at HGSE in 2010. And he has received numerous awards and honorary degrees, including from Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, and the University of Pennsylvania. Further, Jeff has been an outstanding alumnus and friend of HGSE. In 2012, we awarded him the HGSE Medal of Education Impact for his dedication to equity, innovation, an innovative approach to serving all children, and leadership that has truly transformed the education sector through his decades of service to the field. I was looking back at some notes. It was, I think, exactly a year ago. I was also delighted to host Jeff as part of the HGSE Leadership Series in the early days when we were all pivoting and going through the changes of COVID. And we discussed educators as first responders. I think you may have been the first one, Jeff, I heard actually frame it that way, but it's absolutely true. And I really appreciated how you urged us all to make sure that we were using a whole child approach as we worked to address the continuing needs, many of which were really exposed in new ways by what was going on with COVID. So as you previewed for us then, this is such a critical time, such an important time to imagine what is possible for education and for all learners. So Jeff, again, I'm grateful that you could join us today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeffrey Canada.
Dean Long, what a pleasure it is to be back here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and be with my good friend Paul and all of you all, which I just can't wait for us to get back in person because I miss you all. I just want to say this. I know you're like, oh, Jeff, you don't know. Yes, I do. People who are working in this field, trying to save our children, I feel like we are family. And I miss you. I miss being around you. I miss seeing you and can't wait for us to be able to be together in person. And I promise if I get the invitation when we're all in person, I will be here because I think the work that we're doing is so important. So just a word about why I came out of retirement. So first of all, people kept saying, Jeff, you would hate retirement. No, I did not. I spent 7 years not worrying about a call at 10:30 at night. If I got any calls in the evening, it was just my grandkids who, needed money. Simple things like that. And just enjoyed for the first time in 35 or 40 years not being on the front lines. I came back because I recognized that there was an opportunity in this country to work with people like yourselves, that this field of collaborative action was starting to really catch fire in America. And it's what I ended up believing was the answer to poverty. And so I came back to create the William Julius Wilson Institute. And just so you understand, Bill Wilson, who's a friend, two of his books changed my life. One was When Work Disappears. And in it, he made to me a compelling argument of the importance of employment, of the ability to provide for yourself and your families as being the precursor to all the social ills we end up dealing with in poor communities. All of the domestic abuse, the housing inadequacies, the mental health issues, the substance abuse. He said, when folks can't find employment, you begin to see these issues appearing in communities. Often they are attributed to race, or maybe certain geographic areas, maybe urban centers. But he said so much of it is tied to basically being able to provide for yourself and your family. And it changed the way I started thinking about this work. And I was determined that I was going to try as much as possible to end this generational poverty issue that was impacting places around this country and the creation of the Harlem Children's Zone. So I think, first of all, I think educators are dealing with two issues at the same time. One is just the equity issue. Schools that are in poor communities often get less funding, less experienced teachers, worse facilities. I mean, there is just equity that matters in these places. And then in those places, we want to make sure that we're doing the best practice we can around educating children who are behind. So I've been fighting for this equity issue, waiting for Superman, the other work I've been yelling and screaming, just trying to make sure we get the best potential strategies in these places to help struggling students. So that's one issue we're dealing with. But there's another issue, and people get this confused. I don't believe schools can do it on their own. And folks keep confusing this issue that I don't believe schools alone can make up for all of the challenges in poor communities, particularly communities of color, with the fact that I think that schools in those communities have to continue to work on these equity issues, have to continue to work on the teaching and instruction and the curriculum and the professionalism and making sure we're providing the wraparound services and supports for kids. That needs to go on in schools that are in the most devastated communities in this country. And we need to continue working on that. And I think all of us are aware. But I'm saying at the same time that schools can't make up for a history in this country of disinvesting in these communities. Intentional disinvestment in housing, intentional disinvestment in healthcare, intentional disinvestment in the education system, that in the end, we have created in this country a complex series of obstacles for poor children and families to overcome. And we have decided that the answer, and the only answer we're going to give to that problem is schools and education. Oh yeah, you can get those schools to work, everything is going to be fine. That is simply not true. Schools can't do this on their own. I believe very deeply in the fact that we have to have a more collaborative strategy for improving education in these communities. And that's what we've been doing at the Harlem Children's Zone. It is trying to make sure that poor children have the best practice in all the areas we care about. 0 to 3, early childhood, grade elementary, middle school, high school, getting kids into college, ensuring that they have adults surrounding them that can help with their mental health and their health care. We're dealing with obesity issues in Harlem. We're trying to make sure that we're teaching kids about nutrition and exercise so that they can live healthier lives. The one thing that COVID exposed in our country is how linked poor communities are to all of the social ills, whether it's poor employment, poor housing, inability to socially distance, being the workers on the front lines who are getting sick, and then the healthcare issues that comorbidities cause so many of these young parents and older parents and adults and grandparents to actually die at record numbers. This is a systemic problem that this country has been allowing to exist literally for hundreds of years. So with that, we can't suddenly say, you know what the answer is? The answer is going to be just simply fix the school and everything is going to be fine. That is not true. That's not the case. That's why at the Harlem Children's Zone, we're caring about housing and healthcare and after-school programs and employment programs and mental health for parents and families. All of these issues impact the chances of children reaching their full potential. Now, I want to start with an area I think we all would agree on, which is the real need to have a set of high expectations for our children. People have gotten on my case about having one goal for the children in the Harlem Children's Zone, and it's for college. And they say, Jeff, what about vocational schools? And that, I'm fine with that, but I don't want my teachers, and I don't want my after-school workers, and I don't want our social workers to think that we have any other goal for our kids other than preparing them for college. That means all of the academic work, all of the pre-college work, all of the SATs and the PSATs, all of that has to happen. And then if one of my kids decides, I've gotten into 3 colleges, but you know what? I don't want to go to college this year. I want to go and become a fire person or a police officer. I'm good with that. As long as the option exists for those children. This sense of high expectations, I think we have understood in this country that that has been part of the challenge when it comes to teaching our children in poor communities. And we all have to raise those stakes up. More complicated, in my opinion, is how we bring the systems together that actually support schools for real. Part of the challenge we have is that the work is hard, and it is hard. And we get frustrated, and sometimes our best efforts don't lead to the kind of results that we hope for. But I think there is no alternative. Now, the dean mentioned this moment. So in my 45 years of education, I have argued about the disinvestment in our schools, in our education systems, the lack of a comprehensive view of education that involves more than just the teacher and the principal and administrators, but really thinks about children and their families as complete units and not as separate individual units. Well, we have, because of the American Rescue Plan, received a guarantee of a sufficient amount of resources for us really to not make resource an issue about how we design this next chapter in education in this country. And this is a huge challenge. I told folks, I feel like the dog who caught the car. My whole career, I've been saying, we need real resources to come in. We need to make sure that they can deal with these challenges and provide tutoring and after-school programs. And suddenly, that money now exists. Now the question is, are we prepared to use that money in a significant way? And I think the answer to that has to be yes, we're going to do all of the planning necessary, and then we're going to insist that we work together on this issue as a team so that we come up with the best plans possible for the children and the adults. I want to remind you about why I think that part of what we've done in this country is that we've diagnosed the problem wrong. As long as we diagnose this problem as having to deal with individual children, individual families, we miss the systemic problems that I think growing up poor in this country, growing in particular if you're poor and Black and brown, what that has meant for your family, for your community. And so I just think about my experience in education in this country. So, you know, when I finished up at the Ed School, 1975, yes, I will tell, I know a lot of you are thinking, wow, that guy is really old. I am. And I took a job in Boston in 1975. And anybody knows Massachusetts, you know that Boston was going through busing at that particular point in time. And so I went to a school that was really for students who had been kicked out of their traditional public schools. It was started by a professor at Harvard, John Schlein. May he rest in peace, a good man, a good friend. And we believed that for kids who had been expelled from their schools, that you couldn't just do academics. You had to provide, because these kids had suffered all kinds of trauma. You had to provide counseling services for these kids at the same time. So this is back in 1975, 75 through 83. I ended up running that school for a number of years. And it taught me another critical thing about poverty, because I had grown up poor in the South Bronx, but it was mostly African Americans and Latinos, mostly Puerto Ricans, who were in my neighborhood, very few white people. So I never understood what white poverty looked like. By the time I got to Boston, I was working in the poor white communities at that time in 75, South Boston, Charlestown, East Boston, white kids in the projects. And you know what I found out? Poverty is poverty. That we have to deal with the impacts, because what those kids were going through were similar to what the kids that I grew up in the South Bronx were going through. And I realized, while people put a racial sort of definition on some of these behaviors, it was really just being poor in America that was undermining families, was undermining communities, and undermining these young people's ability to get an education. So that was 75. I got back to New York in 83. And we were in the midst of seeing these communities fall apart, seeing communities literally being destroyed. It was after the riots. Drugs were flowing into these communities. The schools were failing. Kids had just given up, thought there was no way out. Things only got worse with the crack epidemic. And then we had people talking about things like super predators. And again, I'm dating, folks may not remember that time in this country, but people began to say, because so many of these kids were being born to crack addicted parents, they had drugs in their system, that they were going to end up being such terrorists that they were going to kill without any conscience. And this was a real honest discussion in our country about poor Black and brown children in America. And we had the crime bill in 94. We built those prisons. I watched them come into the communities and lock people up at numbers that we're still recovering from till this day. Meanwhile, the other issues, while we're spending on criminal justice, we're not investing in housing, we're not investing in healthcare, we're not investing in education, and these systems continue to crumble. So if you want to know why, I think this is about collaborative action. This is about not just schools, but how schools work in rebuilding the community and the family that's falling apart, is because of these experiences that have unfairly impacted certain communities, certain families, and led to the inability to gain the skills, to get the jobs, to pull yourself out of poverty to become more socially and economically mobile in this country. All of that has been missing. So I feel like I'm on a crusade. We have the opportunity, first time in my history, 45 years as an educator, we have the opportunity to actually build a kind of, I think, comprehensive, place-based efforts that can drive outcomes for these children and their families in a way that we've never seen before. And I'm just going to encourage everybody out there to remember that we have a whole generation of children and adults who've been traumatized like never before. This issue of trauma, of the toxic stress of being in places where you're fearful of your life and your health and your family and your grandparents. We've never seen anything like it. It's impacted children of every age. It's impacted our families. And what we know about trauma is that it doesn't end in 6 months. You just don't go see a counselor for 3 days or 5 times or 5 weeks and everything's going to be fine. That's not how this works. This is going to take a really intensive set of strategies for years if we're going to help the poorest members of our community sort of overcome what this last year has meant in their lives. I think the only way to do it is the work you all are doing on the ground. I sincerely believe that. Again, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's going to be, oh yeah, you know what, this is just going to be a cakewalk now. I think it's going to take a lot of hard work and effort. But I also think this is the time. If we ever had a country that's prepared to acknowledge the inequities that have been built into this system, right now, I see that happening in America at every level. It's not like everybody is saying, oh yeah, we get it, we understand what's happening, but enough Americans are looking at this situation, seeing what is sort of unavoidable, the killing of Black and brown men and women, the death and dying of people of color at higher numbers than other folks. The fact that all of these health issues are becoming apparent, and the schools have been closed, and kids have attended fewer live sessions if they're Black and brown than if they're white. And we know that that has had an impact on them. So this learning loss is universal. The trauma is universal. And I think the answers we have to provide are also universal. So I'm excited that you invited me here today. I've given you a lot of the bad news. The good news is that flowing into our communities, there are the resources that are going to allow us to begin to repair, restore, and rebuild the education, family, and civic infrastructure our children and families need to be successful. And we can't blow this opportunity. It's once in a generation, once in my lifetime. We've got to take this opportunity and succeed. So with that, I'm going to stop. I know that people may have questions, and I'm happy to answer questions on any area that folks have.
Wonderful. Great start. Thank you for the inspiration and the provocation. Jeff, please join me in the audience and unmute yourself and giving our guest speaker, our keynote speaker, the applause he deserves. We appreciate that very much. What we're going to do for the next few minutes, I'm going to ask Jeff a few questions just to get things rolling. And then if you have questions, please place them in the question and answer function, and then they'll be relayed to me, and we'll try and get as many of them as we can before we close down at about 25 minutes past the hour. So Jeff, picking up on a theme that both of us really emphasized in our remarks this morning, we've got this exceptional moment, unprecedented moment. And given your experience in the Harlem Children's Zone and nationally, your knowledge and experience with all kinds of efforts like this across the country, what should be our two kinds of priorities? What should be our policy priorities? What should be our spending priorities if we want to make best use of this moment?
So great question. On the policy front, I think there is an opportunity that's being presented that, again, is unprecedented. It has to do with the child tax credit. And that child care tax credit is going to reduce poverty in America in a way that those of us who've been fighting this issue have never, ever seen. And it's temporary. And it's going to sunset. And if anyone's following the machinations in Washington right now, know that, there's a real debate about the support for some of the social policy ideas in the Biden administration. I am convinced that one of the key drivers, remember William Jewis Wilson, families don't have resources. You begin to deal with all the social ills from just poverty by itself. And I think this is an area that we should make sure that there is a permanent sort of support for parents. This is universal, by the way. This is for all parents and children. I think that's the way to go to stop this from being something that folks use to divide us as Americans. So I think this idea that we should make sure as much as possible children aren't born into poverty in this country. To me, Paul, is one of the biggest issues we face, one of the biggest opportunities we've had. And there is something in place right now that I think we should see that it continues. So that's the one thing I'm going to be focused on. I love all the stuff, so people won't be surprised, that college, the reducing the fees for college, allowing colleges for 2-year colleges to be, I think all of that's great. The thing that I am focused on is trying to ensure that we reduce the poverty rates in this country. I think that's going to answer a lot of the challenges we face as a nation. Now, and go ahead, do you want to?
Well, okay, I'm going to come back to the spending priorities, but while you're on this topic, you got to really a source of my second question, which was really the sustainability aspect of this. And you've touched on the challenge. I mean, this government coming in has made an enormous commitment. They've got the Congress to go along with it, and it's going to expire. What do you think are the best ways and means and strategies in terms of building that movement to sustain the commitment in a nation that's divided about whether or not this is a good investment, whether or not we want, quote unquote, big government or big government spending, whether this is a place government should be? How do we build the demand for this so that we're able to sustain it over time?
Paul, the most critical question I think there is the one that you've just asked. And right now, I know there are folks who are waiting to prove that public investments don't pay off and that we shouldn't be doing these kind of massive investments in public institutions. So I think the most important thing we can do is be successful, collect data, and demonstrate that this investment has paid off. I was meeting with the Secretary of Education about 2 weeks ago. And what I said to him is that in the end, I think we have to be able to point to all the places where this is paying dividends and what those dividends look like and why this investment is important. And I think, Paul, the work that you all are doing and the work that this group represents, that this has to be one of the proof points where when people say, well, what did that produce? We can point to places across this country where this has made a real difference. And I think this is critical. I will also tell you, that my big concern is the way that you stop, I think, some of the social good of programs in this country is you use race. That folks begin to think this is for those Black and brown people. This is not for white people. There's a lot of poor whites in this country who are going to benefit from the investment in schools, from the investment in childcare, from the investment that we're talking about in supporting your parents. We've got to make sure the universality of this for America becomes the point, even as we're ensuring these equity issues for Black and brown children. I know that's going to be a wedge issue if it's presented in that way. So it seems a little contradictory. Yes, historically, these underinvestments in these communities we need to tackle. When we talk about why this is important for America, we have to have a wider lens so that, if the folks in West Virginia don't understand why this has been good for them, then I don't think Joe Manchin believes that he needs to support this kind of work. And I think you can go place after place after place in this country where this particular investment will pay off if it's used wisely. And I think that's what we have to do. So this first part is for folks like the ones listening today to really come up with serious plans that have evidence-based strategies behind them and real ability to use this money wisely. Let me tell you the one hesitation that I worry about. I worry that folks are so worried about the money ending that they're not going to spend the money wisely to drive the outcomes that we need to drive to demonstrate the money works. So this is going to be a real challenge. I understand it's going to sunset and we don't want to have a bunch of folks and then say, okay, all of it's gone. But if we don't use this money to drive results, then in the end, people are going to say the thing didn't work, it didn't produce anything. So if I'm going to bet on what side of the coin, I'm going to bet on, let me prove to you this works. And then I'm going to worry about when the money runs out, then worrying about when the money runs out, and yet I can't prove the results. So that's my belief there. And I think, yes.
All right, let me a couple of comments. When you first mentioned Bill Wilson's work, When Work Disappears, it put me in mind of West Virginia and Middle America, white mortality rates going down. The anger of our current politics arising from the same phenomena that he chronicled in inner city kinds of situations. And we're dealing with this as a nation. So that, it seems to me, to be part of the reframing. On your second point, we know that, a lot of this money, in reaction to what had been perceived as top-down government funding through education reform and things of this nature, is now very much bottom-up. Yep. So it's going out to 13,500, 14,000 districts. We know, by the way, the flip side of what you're saying about spotlighting great examples is that there are going to be examples of misfeasance and malfeasance and corruption that will be used to undermine all of this. And that makes it all the more important that we triumph over those examples with more positive examples of our own. So coming to the question, as you think about spending priorities in this, the wisest investments, I mean, you've talked about the tax credit, so that's set up by law. But for those school districts, for example, and civic governments that are making decisions on spending, where would you push them to think about evidence-based spending for the kind of positive results that will help us sustain this?
So this is interesting because, people might know my work with Waiting for Superman and taking on the teachers unions and some of the other stuff. But Randy Weingarten and I, Randy, the head of the UFT, second biggest union in the country, did an op-ed together, ended up in the Daily News, basically saying that we have to come together and do some things that are important for this country at this moment right now. And we both called for starting with summer school. Here's, to me, Paul, these are gross categorizations, so I don't want folks to think I'm being unintentionally sort of broad. We have a lot of kids who have missed a lot of time in school, and they've missed a lot of subject areas. And one of the things is that a lot of them are traumatized now in thinking about school. And there are a lot of kids who have disappeared because they're in high school and they took jobs and they're working and their parents need that money and they're not thinking about coming back to school. We've got to use the summer to re-engage young people with the idea that school is important, it's fun, it's social, and learning also is important, fun, and social, and begin to use that time to not only do remediation for learning loss. That I think is important, but not as important as reintroducing young people to this idea of why we think schools are important. You're going to have excitement. You're going to learn. You're going to be social. You're going to have fun. You're going to do all the kind of stuff, sports and the other things that you've missed. So that when the fall comes around, we have a bunch of kids say, I can't wait to get back to school. Not just that we use summer to think of just remediation and get, oh my God, I don't want to go have hours and hours of this stuff. I think if we think about dealing with the social emotional learning portions of a child's life, trying to think about the areas that we really want to re-engage young people in, not to boil the ocean, not to try to do everything, but to try and figure out, are there a couple of things we can accomplish academically this school year? I think in the summer, that's the perfect opportunity. So I would say that to me is a starting place. One of the things we've heard is that teachers are tired. It's been exhausting for them. A lot of them have, like, they're human beings like the rest of us. A lot of them have been traumatized. A lot of them have their own family issues they've been dealing with. And so we've got to make sure that we have a motivated, excited workforce that we're using at strategically important times. So here is where the partnerships really matter. I'm not going to try and get my teaching staff to work 6 hours a day in the summertime. But can we use them strategically to help, I think, boost the academic rigor of our summer programs? I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. Can we find tutors? There's a whole movement now around high intensity tutoring that I think is important, because a lot of tutoring is not very good. There is a movement also around accelerated learning, saying, yes, kids lost learning last year. Don't try to reteach every subject. Let's figure out what are the key elements of a subject and teach those things. These are the kinds of evidence-based practices that I would encourage folks to invest in. And then on the social emotional side, I think that we've got to think about, guidance counseling is not the same as providing the real kind of counseling supports children need. And if I'm running a school, I'm going to look around and try and figure out what are the institutions that can work with children and their families. How do I engage them? How do I scale this work so that young people, I'll give you one example, Paul. Every time in the inner cities, kids often have to deal with death. They know people who get shot, and the violence is up and all over the country, and certainly it's up in New York. In upper middle class communities, if there's a school shooting, the next day the school is flooded with counselors. The first thing you hear, oh, we're bringing counselors in for our students and our teachers, because they understand what it is to traumatize a whole school. We're not thinking the same way about children in poor communities who've been traumatized. They've been traumatized in much of the same way, not just by the increase in homicides and shootings, but by the increase in death and sickness that they've experienced. We need to scale up the kind of social emotional supports for these young people seriously. And there are a few folks out there who are thinking about that also.
Jeff, in terms of the, we're going to go to some of the questions now we have from members of the group, and we have one about, how do we document that children and families are benefiting from the substantial investment? How do we show impact, and how should we be about measuring the impact of our work as we go forward here, so that we have those results to show, to make the case for sustainability?
Great. So to me, I was having this conversation actually inside the Harlem Children's Zone in our own schools. We have a new baseline. So Harlem Children's Zone, we have an old baseline from a year ago. There's no reason for us to suspect that that is where children are. So where our seventh graders were a year ago, we do not think our current seventh graders are in that place. We need to establish the current baseline of where our children are, so that we can demonstrate their progress based on that starting point, and not the old starting points, which I'm saying have been undermined by COVID-19. So the first thing I'm going to say, we need a real baseline for where our young people are. And then I think we need a realistic a set of strategies for what's realistic in terms of movement for a young person in this first year. This is a non-scientific statement. I think if you can get a kid to do a year's movement in this next academic year, that is going to be huge because this is not going to be a normal year. These kids have not gone through what we would consider to be a routine academic year. So even though I'm thinking about how do we catch kids up and how do we accelerate them for this first year, I'm saying if we can just get a year's progress, if I can get a fourth grader reading on the fifth grade level by the end of the year, I'm going to feel like that was a successful year. Next year, I want to actually accelerate that and move that forward. But I don't want to pretend that this year in trying to mitigate what's happened in the past and get our kids refocused and get their bodies and their emotions healed so that they're engaging in school, 1 year academic progress in 1 year's time, knowing that for a bunch of our kids, we're going to have to get 1.5 years in the second year so that we can begin to actually catch them up where they need to be. So that's how I'm thinking about measuring. I think if you can demonstrate that you've got your kids back on a yearly learning so that they're gaining that academic enrichment over the course of the year, then you've got a strong case to say that this was a strong investment. As long as we realize in year 2, we're going to have to accelerate that to try and gain more than just a year so we begin to catch these kids up if they've missed time.
Jeff, you talked earlier about the need to bring community-based organizations together to, fulfill the sort of civic purpose of collaborative action and get everybody to the table. And there's a question here that wonders about, how if you'd speak to the value of leveraging community-based organizations, and also how is the best way to bring them together? For example, you mentioned summer school, and there's so many organizations in our communities that have enriching activities that go beyond just academics to offer to kids. But in general, you've got a host in the Harlem Children's Zone of organizations that can contribute and be helpful. But how do we organize this? It's bigger than the schools, but we can't just break down the old silos and have anarchy. We've got to organize it. How do you organize it and make that happen?
Yeah, and here I think that, this is years ago when before community schools, when I was very involved in the Beacon School movement that they were doing in New York City back during the Clinton years. And one of the idea of a Beacon School was you had a host organization, which at that time would be like the Harlem Children's Zone. And then 30 to 40% of those dollars would go for you bringing in other organizations to work with you. And so we worked with the school to try and figure out what was the sort of range of services and supports. And here was the problem that I want schools to avoid. We often decided that by bringing in these organizations that specialized in sports and arts, that we were also going to get them to do the tutoring that we thought needed to happen. And this was a 50-50 proposition, meaning many of them were great in teaching dance or organizing team sports, but that did not necessarily make them great tutors. And I think that we have the ability now to segregate what we think we need in schools. And I think that the sports, folks who do well, I think folks who do well in the arts, both the performing arts, musical arts, fine arts, what we need is a coordinating entity. And if there is an organization that's a not-for-profit that can play that role, that maybe is not doing all the things, but can sort of bring on other folks, I think that's the way to go. I think it's tricky if you don't have a direct relationship with other not-for-profits in your community to try and discern who would be the best fit for an individual school. So that way, if you have a relationship with one and they kind of know the field in general, that's the way I would do. the other way is, let's say you don't have that relationship. The other way is, I think that the school needs to figure out, here's what we think would be really exciting for our students. And it's different in different communities. In some communities, they want to play baseball or softball or something like that. Others, maybe it's basketball, maybe it's gymnastics. My thing is that I want to find folks who are passionate about that and are age appropriate. It's different working with elementary schools than it is with middle school than it is with high school. So I want to target who's coming in as having some expertise in working in the grades and the ages of the kids. And you're going to have to do some interviewing. And I think you can be totally upfront. Typically, because there's not money, you're working with whoever has the money to provide the service. To the extent that there is money for support, what you now want is quality. And you can ask the tough questions. How many kids, what sort of the outcomes that you're looking for with young people. And this issue of outcomes to me is really critical, because good youth development, for folks who don't know what it is, there's a lot that's been written about it, is involved in every arts and sports program that we think is running a quality service. And the providers ought to know about good youth development, and they ought to be able to talk about what it means to provide solid, good youth development within a tennis program or a chess program or a basketball program. That I think is critical, that the leadership knows it, but also that they have some demonstrated ability to do it. Last thing I must say on this, I only believe 30% of what people tell me. The other 70% I have to go see for myself. So I know it's a burden, but I would tell folks, if you don't have a personal relationship, someone comes in, they say, hey, Jeff, I'm with the Harlem Children's Zone. I run great sport. I want to go see your programs. I want to go see what it looks like. I want to see what your parents are saying, what the students are saying. I want to know that you've really got what I would consider to be a quality set of programmatic supports for children and families.
Great. Jeff, we have a question about sort of breaking down the old mindset of making, factory model kind of approach to schooling. And as you know, we at the Ed Redesign Lab have worked a lot on personalization and individual plans and navigators. How do you see moving away from those old mindsets, which weren't meeting kids' needs, to a one-size-fits-all model, not really working, to a more personalized system? Is that feasible? Have you seen success with approaches to breaking that down?
Oh, I think the one thing that you will find is that because we are constantly trying to see whether the data suggests to us kids are learning, we are constantly challenging ourselves to think about how we're working differently with young people who are not able to master the curriculum or the subject matter that we're dealing with. Let me tell you what I think the biggest obstacle is for teachers and administrators in understanding or actually implementing the kind of personalized, individualized instruction that's creative that you're talking about. Most of them have never seen it. Most of them have never experienced it. And what we have found is that one of the best, I think, aids in helping this work is to actually let people see what it looks like in real life and to experience it, because if we all go back to our defaults in our job, and if your default has been that you've been taught a certain way, it's very hard to break that mental model if you're not comparing it to something. And we have increasingly tried to use video instruction and video filming to just actually help folks see what they're doing, what other people are doing, and why it actually is paying off better for certain young people. The issue that I think we have been taught as educators, if a child is not learning, they get an F, right? Because that's on them. We don't get the F because it's on us. And this default that I teach, and you as a kid, if you don't get it, I give you a grade that suggests that you're failing, but not that I owe it to this child to think differently about how I'm presenting information so they can get it. That's been the problem. And I think what most educators would say is, but I got 30 kids in a class. I got 26 kids in a class. How can I do that for everyone? And there is where, if you haven't seen it, you don't really understand why it could work for you.
I want to press just a little harder on that one to say, I think this notion of personalization goes beyond just what happens in the school to what we do as parents as we think holistically about our children. I mean, there's a set of needs that they have outside of school that pertain to them coming to school actually ready to learn.
Yeah.
And that might be medical, it might be mental health, it might be after school, it might be early childhood, all these kinds of things. And then there are the set of needs inside schools. And it seems like those of us who have privilege are able to string together and meld that all together so as to breed success. But it's much harder to do if you don't have the financial resources and the social capital to do it. So how do we invent a system that makes that kind of personalization 360 degrees possible for everyone?
Well, I think this is where this idea of a navigator comes in, because it is personal. And if you don't actually understand the sort of challenges that a family is facing, and I'll just give you a really quick example. I had a family, and they were in school. This kid was coming in, and he was hallucinating. They wanted to take him in to give him medication because he was only like 11 to 12. They felt like he was having a schizophrenic break. And instead, I sent a social worker over to the house to try and figure out what was going on with the family. And we found out that the house was infested with rodents, and this kid's job was to stay up at night and keep them off the bed so his two little sisters could sleep. So he was sleep deprived, and he was doing what any sleep deprived person was doing. He was dreaming out loud. He was talking out. So here we had what looked like an issue that was a medical issue, but if no one had taken the time, we would have put the kid on medication. And he would have ended up sleeping, and it would have destroyed. The whole family was counting on him to do his job. I use that as an example about why that if you don't have the time for somebody to really understand what's going on in a family's life, you can make the wrong diagnosis, come up with the wrong strategy, and actually do more harm than good. We had the time to do that. I could send somebody to the house. We could then meet and convene. Every single child in our system should have that opportunity to have somebody who knows them well enough to do that secondary thing. Let me go and talk to the family, see what else is necessary to try and help their life move forward. I think that's part of the overall education strategy. It's not built in the way we think about education with teachers and teachers' aides and the other, but I think we've got to change that rubric so it allows us to do more of those kind of interventions, because often that's what's going to make the difference.
Okay, I'm going to set you up because we're almost at time. But Jeff, one last sort of question, which will be a platform for an inspirational closing from you, which is, we've got a world in a country that's kind of exhausted from what we've been through. We're coming out of it. And there's a lot of push to go back to the status quo ante, which wasn't working for a lot of people for reasons that we well know and you have described. So we're trying to energize educators who are exhausted, community members, families, to think big, to think about transformational change in this moment. What do you suggest in terms of how to do that? How to give them the inspiration they need to overcome the well-deserved fatigue that they're feeling at this stage?
Well, so great question. It starts with ourselves. And people think I'm kidding about this when I say one of the most important things we can do is take care of ourselves. We've been traumatized. We've gone through this. So that we have to make sure that we're getting ourselves healthy so that we can help other people. The other thing, and I think you may know this, Paul, being 69 and coming from the South Bronx, I understand what's at stake. All of my male friends I grew up with are all gone. There's one kid left. this actually is a matter of life or death. It doesn't feel like that sometimes. You're dealing in the third grade and you're dealing with another system. You just say, this is so complicated. This literally is going to be the reason lots of folks are going to live and lots of folks aren't going to make it. There's a group of us. I tell folks, I believe this, the cavalry is coming. The first thing we've got coming are the supplies. They're on their way. Don't give up now. We're finally getting the reinforcements to come in. We've never seen these kinds of resources flowing in our community, ever. And it's going to give us an opportunity to, I think, demonstrate what happens when you unleash education creativity with commitment and actually the funds to deliver. We just need the time and we can change this whole thing. And by the way, it's up to us. There's nobody else going to do it. You're going to have to do it. I'm going to have to do it. Each person on this webinar has to say, I'm going to do my part to make sure that this moment, this is one of those historical moments. I lived through the war on poverty. Everybody says it didn't work. This is one of those historical moments that we can make sure when they think about what happened in the next 2 or 3 years, they say, yeah, we understand. We found a solution to poverty. We need to do more of this. So let's get on our job.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's on us. That's the message we started with. That's the message we'll conclude with. It's on us to supply the leadership in this moment. And we thank you so much for your leadership. What I love about hearing Jeff Canada speak is he's provocative, he's pragmatic, and in the end, he's inspirational. So we're so honored to have had you with us today. And I know my colleagues join me in deep appreciation for you and your work and your leadership, particularly in this moment. Thank you for stepping back up and coming out of retirement. We appreciate.
Thanks, Paul. I wish everybody the best.
You bet. Same to you. Okay, we have another session coming up shortly. And in a moment, we're going to have a slide that will tell you about the topic we've just been talking about, really, which is the American Rescue Plan. That's the opportunity, the promise of and challenges to rebuilding communities. That will start at 2 p.m. Eastern time and go till 3 p.m. We've got a great panel. You can see it listed here. Take a 30-minute break and we will look to see you in a half an hour. Again, thank you all for being with us. We look forward to the continuing conversation.